The moment my husband walked into the dining room with another woman on his arm, I knew my life had already been decided for me. No warning. No discussion. No dignity. Just a quiet execution of my place in his life. It was a warm evening in Dallas, and Margaret had insisted on hosting one of her family dinners. That meant crystal glasses, white linen, and the kind of polite smiles people wear when they are measuring your worth. I had spent the entire afternoon helping the staff prepare the table. Even though it wasn't my house. Even though there were 2 maids and a chef already employed. Margaret always said it was good for me to stay useful. I was placing the final plate when I heard the front door open. Ethan's voice echoed through the hallway. Confident, relaxed, almost cheerful. But there was another voice with him. A woman's voice.
Soft, smooth,
familiar in the worst possible way. My stomach tightened before I even saw them. When they entered the dining room, Ethan didn't look nervous. He looked proud. His hand rested casually on the lower back of a tall blonde woman standing beside him like she had every right to be there. She was dressed in a sleek navy dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. Perfect smile. The kind of woman who had never been asked to scrub a kitchen counter in her life. Margaret looked up from the table and immediately lit up. "Ethan, darling," she said warmly. Then her eyes landed on the woman. Her smile widened. "Well," she said slowly. "And who is this?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "This is Vanessa." He said it casually, like he was introducing a colleague or a neighbor. Not the woman standing half a step closer to him than I had seen him stand to me in years. Vanessa extended her hand gracefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's such a pleasure to finally meet you." Margaret took her hand immediately. "Oh, please call me Margaret." The warmth in her voice was something I had spent 5 years trying to earn. Vanessa got it in 5 seconds. I stood frozen beside the table. Neither of them had acknowledged me yet. Then Ethan looked at his mother and delivered the sentence that shattered whatever illusion of a marriage I still had. "Vanessa is the woman I'm going to marry." The room went silent. For a moment I wondered if I had misheard him. But Margaret didn't look shocked. She looked delighted. Her eyes moved between them with open approval. "Well," she said softly, almost impressed. "About time." My fingers tightened around the back of the chair I was holding. I finally spoke. "Ethan," I said quietly. He glanced at me like someone noticing a piece of furniture. "Oh, right." He gestured vaguely in my direction. "Vanessa, this is Grace." No explanation. No title. Not wife. Just Grace. Vanessa turned toward me with a sympathetic expression that felt almost rehearsed. "Oh," she said gently. "I've heard so much about you." I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Or throw the wine glass in my hand across the room. But I did none of those things. Because something inside me had already gone cold. Margaret stood and walked over to Vanessa, taking her arm affectionately. "You must be exhausted after traveling," she said. "Come sit beside me." She guided Vanessa to the seat that had always been Ethan's wife's place. My place. And Ethan didn't stop her. He pulled out the chair for Vanessa, like this had been planned for weeks. Maybe it had. Maybe I was simply the last person to find out. I remained standing near the end of the table. Invisible. Replaceable. Disposable. Dinner began as if nothing unusual had happened. Margaret asked Vanessa about her education, her family, her career in investment consulting. Every answer seemed to impress her more. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the far end of the table, listening to my husband laugh with the woman he had apparently chosen to replace me with. At one point, Margaret glanced at me briefly. "Oh, Grace," she said. "Would you mind bringing another bottle of wine from the cellar?" Not please. Not thank you. Just instruction. Like I was part of the staff. Ethan didn't object. He didn't even look at me. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard Margaret say something that made my chest tighten. "She's exactly the kind of woman this family needs." Vanessa laughed softly. And Ethan agreed. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a surprise to them. This was a transition. And I had just been informed that my role was over. But what none of them understood that night was that I had spent 5 years watching this family very carefully. And people who underestimate you often make the biggest mistakes. On the drive back to our room that night, Ethan didn't say a single word. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not even a lie. He simply drove. Hands steady on the wheel. Eyes forward.
Calm.
Like the dinner we had just finished was completely ordinary. But for me, the silence pulled open 5 years of memories I had spent trying to justify. 5 years earlier, when I first arrived in Dallas, everything had felt like a dream. I had grown up in a small farming town in Kansas, where everyone knew each other's pickup truck and family history. My parents worked sunup to sundown running our farm, and success meant paying off equipment before harvest. Then I met Ethan at a charity fundraiser in Kansas City. He was polished, confident, a man who seemed to move through the world with effortless authority. He told me about his family's investment firm in Texas, about the business empire his parents had built,
About the life he could give me.
when he proposed, I believed I was marrying into opportunity. I didn't realize I was walking into a carefully controlled system. The first warning came the week after our wedding. Margaret invited me to lunch at the Dallas Country Club. She arrived wearing a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my father's tractor. Her smile was polite, but the words behind it were sharp. "So, Grace," she said while stirring her tea, "Ethan tells me you used to work at a local bank." "I was a financial assistant," I said. "I handled small business accounts." She nodded slowly. How quaint. I ignored the tone. I was hoping to find something similar here in Dallas. Margaret placed her cup down. "Oh, darling," she said gently. "There's really no need for that." I frowned slightly. "I enjoy working." She gave a soft laugh. "That's very admirable for someone from your background." The sentence hung in the air like a polite insult. Then she leaned closer. "But women in our family focus on supporting their husbands." That was the first time she used that phrase. Women in our family. Over the following months, that sentence became a rule. Every time I mentioned job applications, Margaret had an objection. Working would look desperate. Working would embarrass Ethan. Working suggested our family needed money. Eventually, Ethan repeated the same argument. "You don't need to work," he told me one evening while checking emails. "Mom's right. Just enjoy the life we have." At first it sounded generous. Then slowly it became restrictive. My savings from Kansas ran out within a year. After that, every dollar I spent came from accounts controlled by Ethan and Margaret. The second change happened quietly. Margaret began asking small favors. "Grace, could you oversee the catering for Saturday's dinner?" "Grace, could you organize the guest list?" "Grace, could you check the laundry inventory?" At first it sounded like helping family, but the requests grew. Within 2 years, I was coordinating staff schedules, managing grocery orders, handling cleaning arrangements, planning events, all without pay, all without recognition. The house staff began asking me for instructions because Margaret expected me to supervise everything. One afternoon, I overheard 2 maids talking in the hallway. "Is she the house manager?" "I think she's the daughter-in-law." They sounded confused. Honestly,
So was I.
the worst part wasn't the work. It was the constant reminders that I didn't belong. Margaret corrected the way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I held a wine glass. "This isn't Kansas, dear," she would say with a smile. Ethan always laughed. At first, I thought he simply didn't notice how cruel she could be. But over time, I realized something much worse. He noticed. He just didn't care. Every time I tried to explain how humiliating it felt, he would brush it away. "You're overreacting. Mom's just traditional. You should be grateful for everything we give you." Grateful. That word followed me everywhere in that house. Grateful for the roof. Grateful for the lifestyle. Grateful for the Whitmore name. Until eventually I stopped asking for anything at all. I stopped mentioning work. I stopped defending myself. I learned to stay quiet during Margaret's comments, to smile during dinners, to keep the house running smoothly. Looking back now, I realized something chilling. By the 3rd year of our marriage, I wasn't Ethan's partner anymore. I had become something else. Something convenient. Something useful. Something that made their lives easier. And the worst part? I didn't even realize how carefully my independence had been stripped away until the night Ethan brought Vanessa home. Because when he introduced her to Margaret, and she welcomed her so warmly, I finally understood the role I had been playing all along. I was never meant to stay. I was only meant to serve. And now that they had found someone better suited for their world, they were ready to remove me. But they had forgotten one very important thing. Even the quietest people learn how to survive when they are cornered. The morning after Ethan introduced Vanessa, nothing in the house changed. At least, not on the surface. The sun still poured through the tall windows of Margaret's Dallas mansion. The staff still moved quietly through the hallways. Coffee was still served at exactly 7:30, and I was still expected to run the house. I woke up early, the same way I had for the last 5 years. Habit is a strange thing. Even when your life is falling apart, your body still follows the routines you were trained into. By 8 o'clock, I was already in the kitchen reviewing the weekly grocery inventory with the chef. Mrs. Whitmore prefers the imported olive oil, he reminded me. I know, I said quietly. I always knew. Because every small decision in that house had to meet Margaret's approval. Even olive oil. When the meeting ended, I walked into Margaret's office to give her the weekly expense folder. She didn't even look up at first. She was sitting behind her desk reviewing financial statements from the family firm. Leave it there, she said. I placed the folder on the corner of her desk. Inside it was every receipt from the past 7 days. Groceries, cleaning supplies, staff payments. Every dollar documented. Margaret believed control began with money. Especially my money. She finally looked up and flipped open the folder. Her eyes scanned the receipts. $230 at the grocery store? She asked. That includes the dinner party ingredients, I explained. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. Still excessive. I didn't argue. Arguing never helped. 5 years earlier, I had learned that lesson the hard way. Back then, I still had my own bank account. One afternoon, Margaret had asked casually how much personal savings I had. I answered honestly. A few $1,000s. The next week, Ethan convinced me to merge my account into the family financial structure. It's simpler this way, he had said. Mom manages everything efficiently. At the time, I believed him. Within 6 months, my debit card had spending limits. Within a year, I had to request transfers for anything larger than basic groceries. Eventually, I stopped thinking of it as my money at all. Margaret finished scanning the receipts and closed the folder. You should be more mindful with spending, she said calmly. I am. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment. Then she added something that felt like a quiet test. Vanessa is very good with financial discipline. The name hung in the air like a shadow. I kept my expression neutral. I'm sure she is. Margaret smiled slightly.
Yes.
She has experience in investment consulting. The implication was clear. Vanessa was useful, valuable, educated. Everything Margaret had spent years implying I was not. Later that afternoon, Ethan finally appeared in the house. He walked into the kitchen while I was organizing the pantry shelves. You didn't have to do that, he said casually. But he didn't stop me either. I turned toward him. We need to talk. He leaned against the counter, like this conversation was a mild inconvenience.
About what?
I studied his face carefully. Not a trace of guilt. Just boredom. You introduced another woman as your future wife yesterday. Yes. No hesitation. No shame. Just a simple confirmation. And you think that doesn't require explanation? He shrugged slightly. Grace, things have been over between us for a long time. Over. The word felt strangely hollow. When did you decide that? I asked. He checked his watch. Does it really matter? I stared at him. This man had once promised me partnership. Now he couldn't even pretend to care. Vanessa understands my world, he continued. She fits into this family. I didn't respond. Because what he was really saying was something else. You never did. He pushed away from the counter. Mom's hosting a small dinner tomorrow night. I almost laughed. Another dinner. Another performance. Vanessa will be there, he added. The sentence sounded less like information and more like instruction. Then, he walked out of the kitchen. Just like that. No apology. No discussion about divorce. No concern about what would happen to me. Because in his mind the situation was already solved. I had no job. No savings. No family in Texas. No connections in his world. In other words, no options. And as I stood alone in that massive kitchen, surrounded by the house I had spent years maintaining, I realized something deeply humiliating. They had built my entire life in a way that made leaving almost impossible. Almost. But people who build cages often forget one thing. Even trapped birds spend their days studying the locks. 3 days after that dinner, Ethan finally decided to explain the situation. Not because he felt guilty. Because it was convenient. Margaret had invited several business associates to the house that evening, and the staff was busy preparing the dining room. I was arranging place settings when Ethan walked in and closed the door behind him. For a moment he simply watched me, like someone observing an employee finishing a task. "Grace," he said calmly, "we should settle things." I placed the final fork beside the plate and turned toward him. "Settle what?" He slipped his hands into his pockets. "Our situation." The word situation almost made me smile. 5 years of marriage reduced to a scheduling inconvenience. "So now we have a situation," I said. "Yes." His tone was practical, almost businesslike. "I think it's best if we handle this cleanly." I folded my arms. "Cleanly?" "Yes." He walked to the end of the table and sat down, gesturing for me to sit across from him, like we were negotiating a contract. For a brief moment, I remembered the girl I used to be in Kansas, the one who believed marriage meant partnership. That girl would have cried. But she was gone. I sat down across from him. Ethan leaned back in the chair. "I've been seeing Vanessa for a while." There it was. No hesitation. No shame. "How long?" I asked. "Several months." Months. That meant dinners, trips,
Plans.
all while I was still living in his house, organizing his family's events, managing their staff, smiling politely beside him at charity functions. "You are living a double life," I said quietly. He shrugged. "It wasn't intentional at first. Of course. Nothing ever is. But eventually it became clear Vanessa and I are more compatible." Compatible. Such a convenient word. "And your solution," I asked slowly, "was to introduce her to your mother at dinner." He nodded. That seemed like the simplest way. Simplest.
For him, maybe.
Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder. He slid it across the table toward me. "I've already spoken with a lawyer." I opened the folder. Inside were printed documents. Divorce papers. My eyes scanned the pages carefully. Then I noticed something else. A number typed neatly near the bottom. A settlement amount. It wasn't large. Not even close to 5 years of marriage into a wealthy family. "You're offering me this?" I asked. "It's fair."
Fair.
I looked up at him. "You're serious?" "Yes." His voice remained calm. "You should understand something, Grace." He leaned forward slightly. "This arrangement actually benefits you." I blinked. "Benefits me?" "Yes." He gestured vaguely around the house. "Without me, you wouldn't have access to this lifestyle." I felt something cold settle deeper inside my chest. "You don't have a job," he continued. "No independent savings. No professional connections in Dallas." Every sentence was delivered like a financial report.
Cold.
Precise.
Calculated.
"I'm giving you a clean exit," he said. "You can move somewhere modest, start over." Then he added the sentence he clearly believed was generous. "You should be grateful." Grateful. The same word Margaret had repeated for years. I closed the folder slowly. "And Vanessa?"
I asked.
"What about her? You plan to marry her immediately?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." Of course he didn't. Everything was already decided. The divorce. The replacement. The future. All arranged neatly without me. Ethan stood up and straightened his jacket. "I'd like this resolved quickly," he said. "The sooner we finalize things, the better for everyone." Everyone. Meaning him. Meaning Vanessa. Meaning Margaret. He walked toward the door. then paused for a moment. "Oh," he added casually. "You can stay here for a few days while you figure out where to go." The generosity almost made me laugh. 5 years in that house. And now I was being offered a few days, like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. He opened the door and left. Just like that. I remained sitting at the long dining table, the divorce folder still resting in front of me. Outside the room, I could hear Margaret greeting guests in the hallway. Her voice warm, elegant,
Proud.
preparing to introduce the future of the Whitmore family. Vanessa. I slowly stood up and looked around the room I had managed for half a decade. The polished table, the silverware I had ordered, the curtains I had chosen, all the invisible work that kept this house running. And suddenly something became very clear. Ethan believed I had nothing. No money, no job, no influence, no options. In his mind, I was completely powerless. But what he didn't understand was something I had learned long before I came to Dallas. People who grow up with nothing learn how to rebuild from scratch. And sometimes, the moment you lose everything is the exact moment you become dangerous. I left the Whitmore house the next morning with one suitcase. No dramatic scene. No confrontation. Margaret was still asleep, and Ethan had already left for the office. The staff watched quietly as I rolled the suitcase through the hallway. No one stopped me. No one asked questions. In that house, people had learned that silence was safer than curiosity. Outside, the Texas air felt strangely heavy. I stood at the bottom of the marble staircase for a moment, looking back at the mansion that had defined the last 5 years of my life. 5 years. Reduced to one suitcase. I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. Ethan believed I had nowhere to go. He wasn't entirely wrong. My parents were still in Kansas, but I refused to return home defeated. I needed space to think before explaining everything to them. So I checked into a small business hotel near the Dallas airport. Nothing fancy. Neutral carpets. A narrow desk. A quiet room that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals. For the first time in years, there was no one telling me what to do. No schedule. No expectations. Just silence. I placed my suitcase on the bed and sat beside it, staring at my phone. There was one number I had been thinking about since the moment Ethan handed me the divorce papers. A name I hadn't spoken in almost 8 years. Daniel Brooks. Back in college, Daniel had been the quiet genius in our economics program. While everyone else struggled through financial modeling classes, he seemed to solve complex equations in his head. But what I remembered most about Daniel wasn't his intelligence. It was the way he used to look at me, respectfully, genuinely, like I mattered. We had worked on several research projects together during our final year. Somewhere during that time, he had quietly developed feelings for me. He never pushed, never pressured. But one evening after a study session, he had finally admitted it. "Grace," he had said awkwardly, "if things were different, I'd really like to take you out." I had smiled apologetically. At the time, I was already dating Ethan. "I'm sorry, Daniel." He nodded. I figured. And that was the end of it. After graduation, our lives moved in completely different directions. Ethan's world of private investments and luxury. Daniel's world of startups and technology. But over the years, I occasionally saw his name appear in business articles. Tech entrepreneur, founder, investor. His company had grown faster than almost anyone expected. I had even read once that he moved his headquarters to Houston, which meant he was only a few hours away. I stared at the number saved in my contacts. I had never deleted it. My finger hovered over the call button. Part of me felt ridiculous. Why would a successful entrepreneur want to hear from a woman who had just been thrown out of her husband's house with one suitcase? But another part of me remembered something important. Daniel Brooks had always respected me. And right now, respect mattered more than pride. I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice. Then a familiar voice answered. Daniel Brooks. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 8 years suddenly felt like a lifetime. "Daniel," I said quietly. There was a brief pause. Then his voice changed instantly. "Grace?" I almost laughed. You still recognize my voice? I'd recognize it anywhere. His tone carried genuine surprise. I haven't heard from you in years. I know. Silence settled between us for a moment. Then he asked gently, "Is everything okay?" That simple question broke something inside me. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough to remind me how long it had been since anyone asked that sincerely. "No," I admitted. "It's not." Daniel didn't interrupt. He waited. So I told him the truth. Not every detail, but enough. The marriage, Margaret, the financial control, the dinner where Ethan introduced Vanessa as his future wife. When I finished, the line stayed quiet for several seconds. Then Daniel spoke slowly. "Grace, where are you right now?" "In a hotel near the Dallas airport." "Are you safe?" "Yes." Another pause. Then his voice became firm. "I want you to come to Houston." I blinked.
What?
"I have a guest apartment in my building. You can stay there as long as you need." "Daniel, I can't just." "Yes, you can." His tone softened slightly. "You helped me more than you realize back in college. Now it's my turn." I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest. Something I hadn't felt in years. Support. "But there's something else," Daniel added. "What?" His voice grew quieter. "Grace, you mentioned the woman's name." "Vanessa." "Yes." Another pause. And when he spoke again, his words changed everything. "I think we need to talk about her." Because Vanessa Whitmore wasn't who Ethan thought she was. Daniel didn't say anything for a few seconds after that. The silence stretched across the phone line, heavy and deliberate. "Daniel?" I asked. "I'm here." His voice sounded different now. Focused. Controlled. "Grace, I need to ask you something very carefully." "Okay." The woman Ethan introduced. "Vanessa. Do you know her last name?" I thought back to that dinner. Margaret had asked about her career, her education. But strangely, no one had actually said her full name. "I don't think it came up," I admitted. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Can you describe her?"
Tall. Blonde.
Early 30s. Very polished. Works in investment consulting. There was another pause. Then Daniel said something that made my heart skip. "Did she mention Houston at all?"
No.
"But she said she works with investment clients." Daniel's voice dropped lower. "Grace, I'm almost certain we're talking about the same person." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Another breath on the other end of the phone. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Vanessa is my wife." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. "You're what?" "My wife," he repeated calmly. "Legally speaking, anyway." I stood up from the hotel bed. "What are you talking about?" Daniel didn't rush his explanation. "We separated almost a year ago," he said. "But the divorce was never finalized." "Why not?" "Because she disappeared." The word sent a strange chill through me. Disappeared? She moved out of our apartment in Houston and stopped responding to lawyers. "Did you report it?" "Yes." "But Vanessa is resourceful." I could hear the frustration in his voice now. "She knows how to stay ahead of legal paperwork." My mind raced. "So, while you're still legally married, she's apparently planning to marry your husband." I sat down slowly. This situation was becoming more complicated by the minute. "But that's not the worst part," Daniel continued. "What do you mean?" His tone sharpened slightly. "Vanessa didn't just disappear from my personal life. She disappeared from my company." I frowned. "What company?" "Brooks Analytics." I knew the name. His tech company had developed financial modeling software that investment firms used to track complex portfolios. It was one of the fastest-growing financial tech platforms in Texas. "You told me earlier she works in investment consulting," he continued. "That's not entirely wrong." "How so?" "Vanessa used to manage some of our client relationships." A quiet alarm started building in my chest. And 3 months after she left, Daniel's voice hardened. "My company's auditors found something." "What?" "Missing money." The words landed like stones. "How much?" "Several $1 million." My breath caught. "Daniel, we're still tracing it," he said. But the pattern is becoming clear.
How?
Vanessa was moving funds through fake investment opportunities. A memory from dinner flashed through my mind. Margaret praising Vanessa's financial discipline. Ethan proudly announcing she worked with investments. What kind of opportunities? I asked slowly. Daniel answered immediately. The kind that require wealthy, trusting investors. The implication hit me instantly. You mean people like Ethan? Yes. My mind began connecting the pieces rapidly. Ethan's family had millions tied up in investments. Margaret trusted financial professionals who looked polished and sophisticated. Vanessa fit that description perfectly. Daniel, I whispered. Ethan said they've been seeing each other for months. That timeline fits perfectly. A cold realization settled over me. Vanessa hadn't just stolen money from Daniel's company. She was building something new. A fresh set of investors. A new pipeline of funds. And Ethan Whitmore was probably walking straight into it. Grace, Daniel said carefully, I think Vanessa is using your husband. And my husband is too arrogant to realize it. Yes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then another thought crossed my mind. Daniel. What? Ethan thinks I'm powerless. That could actually be useful. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For 5 years, I had lived quietly inside that house. Listening. Observing. Learning how the Whitmore family operated. They believed I was naive. Simple. Replaceable. But if Vanessa was running a financial scam, and Ethan was involved, then suddenly I had something very valuable. Access. Daniel spoke again. Grace, would you be willing to help me prove what she's doing? I stared at the wall of the quiet hotel room. Just 24 hours earlier, I had been a discarded wife with nowhere to go. Now something entirely different was forming. A plan. Slowly, I asked the only question that mattered. What would you need me to do? Daniel didn't rush his answer. If Vanessa is using Ethan to move money, he said slowly, then eventually they'll talk about it somewhere. Investment plans. Transfers. Deals. And you want proof, I said. Yes. The word was firm. Right now I have financial traces and missing funds. But if she's running a larger scheme, I need direct evidence of intent. And Ethan? If he's knowingly involved, he could be legally exposed too. That thought settled heavily in my mind. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of humiliation. And now my husband might be part of a financial crime. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked. Daniel answered, without hesitation. You go back. I blinked. Back to the house? Yes. They already pushed me out. Grace, he said calmly. Ethan believes you're weak. Dependent. Desperate.
He paused.
That belief is your advantage. I leaned back against the hotel wall. You want me to pretend I have nowhere else to go? Yes. To act like I'm begging to stay. Exactly. The plan felt strange. But it also felt familiar. For 5 years, I had been underestimated in that house. Invisible.
Dismissed.
If they already believed that version of me, then pretending would be easy. What would I actually do there? I asked. Listen, Daniel said. Watch. Record what you can. I frowned slightly. Record? Yes. He explained quickly. I'll send you a secure recording app. It runs quietly in the background. Phone conversations? Any conversations. My mind began shifting into something sharper. Practical. You think they'll discuss investments openly? If Vanessa believes she controls Ethan, she might. And Ethan? Men like Ethan love to brag when they think they're winning. I couldn't argue with that. He had practically bragged when he handed me the divorce papers. So you want proof that Vanessa is moving stolen money through fake investment deals, I summarized. Yes. And that Ethan is helping her. Correct. Silence followed for a moment. Then I asked the obvious question. What happens if we get that proof? Daniel's voice turned cold. Then we stop her. The way he said it made clear he wasn't thinking emotionally. This was strategy. Accountability. Justice. When do you want me to go back? I asked. The sooner the better. I glanced at my suitcase on the bed. 24 hours earlier, I had walked out of the Whitmore mansion with nothing. Now I was about to walk back in. Not as a victim, but as something else. A witness. A trap. Daniel spoke again. Grace, are you sure you're comfortable doing this? I considered the question carefully. Images flashed through my mind. Margaret counting grocery receipts like I was stealing. Ethan introducing Vanessa as his future wife. The divorce folder sliding across the table. The word grateful. Yes, I said calmly. I'm comfortable.
Good.
I'll text you instructions and the recording software. All right. And Grace. Yeah. You won't be doing this alone. For the first time since everything collapsed, I believed that. We ended the call. The hotel room returned to silence. But this silence felt different. Purposeful. I packed my suitcase again the next morning and drove back toward the Whitmore estate. When the gates opened, the house looked exactly the same as it had 2 days earlier. Tall white columns.
Perfect landscaping.
Controlled elegance. Inside, Margaret was sitting in the living room reading financial news. She looked up as I walked in with my suitcase. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. Well, she said. That was quick. I lowered my eyes slightly. Playing the role. I didn't have anywhere else to go. She studied me for a moment. Then she gave a small, satisfied smile. I suspected that might happen. Of course she did. In her mind, I was predictable. Desperate. Easily controlled. Ethan will be home tonight, she said. You can discuss your situation with him then. I nodded quietly. Thank you for letting me stay. Margaret waved a dismissive hand. You may use the guest room for now. Guest room. After 5 years as Ethan's wife. But I simply nodded again. Of course. As I walked upstairs with my suitcase, my phone vibrated softly in my pocket. Daniel. A message appeared on the screen. Recording system active. Be careful. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stepped into the hallway of the house I once thought was my home. Only this time, I wasn't here to serve. I was here to watch. And, eventually, to expose them all. Margaret's birthday parties were legendary in her social circle. Not because of warmth. Because of status. Every year, she hosted a celebration designed to remind everyone exactly how powerful the Whitmore family was. This year's event was even larger than usual. Not in Dallas. In Houston. A sprawling mansion owned by one of Margaret's longtime business partners. Crystal chandeliers. A string quartet. Valets lining the circular driveway. More than 100 guests moving through the rooms in expensive dresses and tailored suits. For 3 weeks leading up to the party, I played my role perfectly. Quiet. Obedient. Invisible. Exactly what they expected. Margaret had already begun treating Vanessa like the new lady of the family. Vanessa visited the house frequently now, often sitting beside Margaret during lunches while discussing investments and social events. Every time she entered the house, she smiled at me with the same polite sympathy, like someone observing a temporary inconvenience. Ethan behaved even worse. He barely acknowledged my presence anymore. Sometimes he spoke about Vanessa openly while I was in the room. She's helping me restructure some investments. She has incredible instincts with capital. She understands how real financial strategy works. Each sentence was delivered with that same quiet arrogance. And every time he spoke, my phone listened. Daniel's recording software worked perfectly. Over the weeks, I captured conversations about new opportunities. About large transfers. About Margaret's retirement funds being placed into Vanessa's exclusive investment network. By the time the party approached, Daniel had already confirmed something disturbing. Millions were moving. Exactly the way he suspected. Which meant tonight was the perfect stage. The Houston mansion glittered with guests when Ethan arrived with Vanessa on his arm. I arrived alone. Margaret barely looked at me when I entered. But Vanessa did. She tilted her head slightly. Still smiling. Still confident. She believed the story Ethan had told her. That I was weak. Broken. Dependent. Dinner ended around 9 o'clock, and Margaret stood to thank everyone for attending her birthday celebration. Polite applause filled the ballroom. Then Vanessa gently touched Ethan's arm. He smiled and stood beside her. Actually, Ethan said, raising his glass, we have a small announcement. The room grew quiet. Vanessa stepped forward gracefully. Her diamond bracelet sparkled under the chandelier lights. We wanted to share some happy news with all of you tonight, she said warmly. She slipped her hand into Ethan's. Gasps and excited murmurs spread across the room. We're engaged. Applause erupted. Margaret looked absolutely thrilled. Guests gathered closer, offering congratulations. Vanessa lifted her hand proudly to display a large engagement ring. I waited until the excitement reached its peak. Then I stepped forward. Congratulations, I said calmly. The crowd shifted slightly when they noticed me. Some people recognized me as Ethan's wife. Others looked confused. Vanessa's smile stiffened slightly. Grace, she said softly, how nice of you to join us. I smiled politely. Oh, I wouldn't miss this. Ethan frowned. What are you doing here? I brought someone who wanted to congratulate you personally. The room quieted again. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. And who would that be? I turned toward the entrance of the ballroom. Right on cue, the doors opened. Daniel Brooks walked in.
Tall, calm,
Impeccably dressed in a dark suit. Several guests immediately recognized him. His company was well known in Texas business circles. Vanessa's face went completely pale. Daniel walked across the room slowly until he stood beside me. He looked directly at Vanessa. Then he spoke clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. Hello, Vanessa. The room went silent. Vanessa stared at him like she had just seen a ghost. Daniel. He gave a small polite nod. It's been a while. Ethan looked between them, confused. You two know each other? Daniel's expression remained perfectly calm. Oh, yes. He paused just long enough for the tension to grow. Then he delivered the sentence that shattered the room. Vanessa is my wife. For a few seconds, no one in the ballroom moved. The words seemed to hang in the air like broken glass. Vanessa is my wife. Ethan looked from Daniel to Vanessa, clearly waiting for her to laugh it off. She didn't. Her face had lost all color. Daniel, she said quietly, forcing a smile, this isn't the place for... For what? He interrupted calmly. The truth. The guests around us began whispering. Margaret stepped forward, her voice sharp. What exactly is the meaning of this? Daniel turned toward her politely. Mrs. Whitmore, I apologize for interrupting your celebration. Then he gestured toward Vanessa. But when someone announces an engagement to my legal spouse, it tends to create confusion. The room erupted into shocked murmurs. Ethan stared at Vanessa. You're married? Vanessa recovered quickly. It's complicated, she said. We've been separated for almost a year. Daniel nodded. That part is true. But what she forgot to mention, he reached into his jacket and removed a thin folder, is that the divorce paperwork was never finalized. Vanessa's eyes hardened. Daniel, stop. But he continued calmly. Which means Vanessa Brooks is still legally my wife. The room had gone completely silent now. Ethan turned slowly toward Vanessa. You told me you were divorced. I said we were separated. That's not the same thing. Margaret looked horrified. This is absurd, she snapped. Surely this can be handled privately. Daniel looked at her again. Normally I would agree. Then his expression changed slightly. But unfortunately this situation isn't just personal. He opened the folder. Inside were printed financial documents, bank transfers, account summaries, corporate audit reports. What are those? Ethan asked. Evidence, Daniel replied. Vanessa's voice cut through the room. Don't you dare. Daniel ignored her. For the past 6 months, he said calmly, millions of dollars have been moved through a series of fake investment opportunities. Guests leaned closer. Phones quietly appeared as people started recording. These investments were presented as exclusive financial opportunities, Daniel continued. High-return projects requiring private capital. Margaret's face turned pale. That's exactly what Vanessa offered our family, she said slowly. Daniel nodded. Yes. He lifted one document. This is a transfer from Brooks Analytics that disappeared shortly after Vanessa left the company. Then he lifted another. And this is where the money went. He turned the page so several guests could see. The name printed on the receiving account was clear. Whitmore Investment Holdings. Ethan's company. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. That's impossible. Daniel looked directly at him. Is it? He pulled out another document. Because according to these records, you personally approved multiple transfers into Vanessa's investment accounts. The room exploded with whispers. Ethan's face flushed. Those were legitimate investments. Vanessa grabbed his arm. Ethan, don't say anything. But it was already too late. Daniel calmly stepped aside. Behind him, two uniformed officers entered the ballroom, followed by a woman in a dark suit. Evening, one of the officers said. The crowd parted instantly. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. You called the police? She snapped. Daniel didn't raise his voice. I called them 2 hours ago. The officer approached slowly. Vanessa Brooks? She glared at him. My name is Vanessa Whitmore. The officer held up a document. Actually, according to the state of Texas, you're still Vanessa Brooks. A few nervous laughs spread through the crowd. The officer continued. We have a warrant regarding financial fraud and embezzlement connected to Brooks Analytics. Vanessa looked around desperately. Her perfect control was gone. This is ridiculous, she said. These accusations are... The second officer stepped forward. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. Ethan looked completely stunned. This is insane, he said. Daniel spoke quietly. It's not insane. He tapped the documents again. It's traceable. Then he added the final blow. Unfortunately, the investigation also uncovered something else. Everyone turned toward him again. Several of the funds used in Vanessa's scheme came from private investors. His eyes shifted to Margaret, specifically retirement accounts connected to the Whitmore family. Margaret's hand flew to her chest. What? Daniel nodded slightly. Those exclusive opportunities Vanessa convinced Ethan to move money into. He paused. Never existed. The realization hit Ethan all at once. You said the investments were secure, he whispered to Vanessa. Vanessa said nothing. The officer gently took her arm. Ma'am. She jerked away, furious now. You idiots have no idea what you're doing. But the room had already turned against her. Guests whispered. Phones recorded. Reputations collapsed in real time. As the officers escorted Vanessa toward the exit, Ethan stood frozen beside the ballroom table. His engagement party had just turned into a financial scandal. Margaret looked 10 years older. And I simply stood there quietly, watching. Because the truth about people like Ethan Whitmore was very simple. They believed power meant control. But the moment that control disappears, everything they built collapses with it. The scandal from that night in Houston spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, videos of the confrontation were circulating through business circles across Texas. By morning, several financial blogs had already published stories about the Whitmore engagement disaster. And the details kept getting worse. Vanessa Brooks was formally charged with multiple counts of financial fraud and embezzlement connected to Daniel's company. The investigators moved quickly once the evidence was confirmed. Daniel's records showed the missing money. My recordings showed the conversations. And Ethan's investment transfers connected everything together. Vanessa's entire scheme began to unravel within days. But the Whitmore family's problems were only beginning. Because the investigators didn't just examine Vanessa's actions. They examined every account she touched, including the ones Ethan controlled. 2 weeks after the party, the Whitmore investment offices were audited. Margaret's private retirement accounts had been heavily tied into the same exclusive opportunities Vanessa promoted. Millions of dollars had been moved, and almost none of it could be recovered. The woman Margaret once praised as exactly the kind of woman this family needs had quietly drained their financial security. The irony was almost poetic. Ethan tried to distance himself from everything at first. He claimed he had simply trusted Vanessa's professional expertise. But the recordings proved something else. His voice, his approvals, his excited discussions about fast returns and private deals. He hadn't just trusted her. He had helped her move the money. While the criminal investigation focused primarily on Vanessa, Ethan's reputation collapsed overnight. Investors withdrew from his firm. Business partners cut ties. Within 3 months, Whitmore Investment Holdings was forced to shut down. Margaret rarely appeared in public after that. The same social circle that once admired her suddenly avoided her calls. Money had always been her power. Without it, she became just another aging socialite with a scandal attached to her name. But the most surprising part of the entire situation came during my divorce proceedings. Ethan's confidence was completely gone. The man who once told me I should be grateful for his small settlement offer now sat across from me in a quiet courtroom looking exhausted. My lawyer presented everything calmly. 5 years of financial control. The recordings. Evidence of emotional manipulation. The judge didn't need long to make a decision. The settlement Ethan once offered me was replaced with something far more significant. Compensation, shared assets, and legal responsibility for the financial restrictions placed on me during the marriage. When the hearing ended, Ethan tried to speak to me outside the courthouse. "Grace," he said quietly. I stopped walking but didn't turn around. "I made mistakes." I almost smiled. That was the first honest sentence he had spoken in years. "You didn't make mistakes," I replied calmly. "You made choices." He had no response to that. I walked away and never looked back. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I moved to Houston and began working with Daniel's company. At first, I helped analyze financial patterns connected to fraud investigations. My background in banking and the years I spent quietly observing the Whitmore finances turned out to be extremely useful. Eventually, Daniel encouraged me to complete additional financial certifications. Within a year, I was leading my own risk analysis projects. For the first time since leaving Kansas, I had something that truly belonged to me. My own career, my own income, my own independence. Daniel remained exactly what he had always been. Supportive, respectful, patient. He never pushed our relationship into anything more than friendship while everything was still healing. But slowly, naturally, our lives began to move closer together again. Sometimes life gives you second chances in the most unexpected ways. As for Ethan, the last time I heard about him, he had moved out of Texas. Several lawsuits from former investors were still unresolved. Margaret had sold the Dallas house to cover legal expenses. The empire they once believed made them untouchable had vanished in less than a year. And me? One evening, nearly 2 years after that disastrous engagement party, I stood in my office overlooking the Houston skyline. Daniel walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "Long day?" he asked. "Productive day," I said. I looked out at the city lights for a moment. 5 years ago, I thought my life had ended when Ethan brought another woman into that dining room. But now I understood something important. That night wasn't the end. It was the moment everything finally began to change. Because in the end, I didn't destroy Ethan Whitmore. He destroyed himself. I simply stopped letting him destroy me.